couch my argument in one of a personal search. If we're going to look at the role of religion in the West and its good aspects or its failures, and we only focus on the failures, trust me, we can look at the failures of religions across the globe from the beginning of time. Why just stop and pick on Judeo-Christianity? Oh my gosh, how many of you in this room have read anything of Indian philosophy or Thailand, the philosophies of the Far East? There are all kinds of religions and philosophical points of view that are less than we would consider desirable. But let me hit a couple here along the way here and discuss. For example, Newton. What Dr. Huemer didn't convey to you as well as he might is that Newton tells us in his own writings that the only reason he's involved in science is because it's a means towards his metaphysical and spiritual investigations. And if you read his own writings, he says that he goes away from mathematics and is only drawn back to it numerous times because of pressure for debates over his work. His whole interest is in metaphysics and in God. Don't take my word for it. Go read his own writings. The idea implicit in Dr. Huemer, also across the board in what he's talking about here, is this classic notion of progress, especially scientific progress. But I think Thomas Kuhn, in his outstanding book on the theory of scientific revolutions, debunked the whole notion of an ongoing progressive linear development of science. Kuhn brilliantly points out that when there's advance at all, it comes in epistemological historical bursts. What think thee? That all the scientists are lined up in white coats with their arms interconnected, marching together, just conquering reality according to the empirical mode of thinking? Is that the only way to think? Empiricism? Materialism? Atheism? I mean, how account for the fact that 80% of the world, if not 90% of the world, believes in some fashion or another in spirituality? Are we all crazy? According to this type of approach, we are. We're all fools. If any of you hold anything other than pure materialism, you're a fool. Now, I can go back through and quote, oh my gosh, any document in the West or the East and pull out inanities and inconsistencies and grab. You can go and you can read anyone and find anywhere in their text some phrase or passage that will make them look like fools. Now, my job here, so to speak, right now is not to try and defend everything that Christianity has done wrong, or Judaism. Oh my gosh, we want to talk about those spiritual religions that have caused harm. Well, let's go down all of memory lane, right? What about the French Revolution, the guillotine, the terror? What about Robespierre quoting at length in the Committee of Public Safety, Rousseau, the contrat social, oui? We can do anything we want under the guise of the general will and do anything they did. As many of you will recall, right? Robespierre led the march out of Paris, out to the Champ de Mars. All of the worshiping the God of reason, the globe sitting on the triangular base. But you got to go look for those types of things, don't you? Why aren't you taught those things? We want to talk about a trip down memory lane. Let's take a look at Hitler, right? That's Nazism, that's socialism, National Socialism. How many people died under that regime? Now, yes, we can talk about the Inquisition. Absolutely wrong. How many people? 200? Go look at the documents. The issues are raised for reasons of argumentation against Roman Catholicism. It has its blemishes, as does any religion and any human being who's lived and ever will live, right? But let's keep a proportionate truthfulness about how we approach the subject. And if we want to talk about empiricism again, let's take a look at Soviet communism. Now, most of you, I come to find out, because I teach students, are coming up, they know nothing of Soviet communism. Well, let me tell you, you ought to look into it. Best guess, 50 million went down into the prisons, the gulags, the re-education camps in North Vietnam and in China. As the saying goes, the demographic mode of the Soviet Union went along and then just blop. whole generation went to the prisons. But that's not taught. Why isn't that taught? Right? Or the Chinese Mao's Great Leap Forward. These are all atheists. These are all materialist philosophies. How many died in the Great Leap Forward? We don't know. 17 to 21 million? Chinese starving to death in their villages because they've been forced by the government to try and put together as peasants little steel and metal mills that would kind of jumpstart their economic economy. I mean, if we're going to look at the whole gamut of it, let's look at the whole gamut of it. And then there's the dream of progress. The classic dream that we've all been into without analyzing it. If you want to hold the idea that religion holds back intellectual progress, well, tell me, what is progress? Is it more materialism? Is that your religion? Gaining more of this, living longer? That's the sign of progress? What religion do you hold to that you hold that you want to live longer to enjoy matter? I'm not saying we shouldn't enjoy a good coffee, a nice slice of pizza, a cup of, right? I'm not saying that. We're talking about a philosophy of reality here. That's what we're talking about. And we can talk about other abuses of man under the guise of materialism and atheism. Right? That's what we're talking about here. Mathematics, the natural sciences. What I would suggest is, I'm a European intellectual historian. I've studied a fair amount of the history of science. My doctoral dissertation was on the history and philosophy of geography. That took me right down into the bowels of scientific methodology. I've read Newton, I've been back to Bacon, I've been down those roads, right? What's interesting is Kuhn points out to us, the only things that science remembers is its successes. It's interesting how many times scientists have done looking for the good, trying to be reasonable, but being mighty screwed up. Well, we forget all those. They go back into the, But look, after all of this, right? Let's be honest. If we're going to have these conversations, let's be honest and look at the totality of the arguments. That's all I'm trying to say here. So progress, Galileo. How many times have I heard this? I mean, my gosh, you can have an argument about anything, about the Catholic Church, and up comes Galileo again. My God, the guy's never going to die. I mean, this is 600 years ago, right? And let me tell you, Galileo, if you really want to study the history of it, and I have, the issue wasn't over the heliocentric theory. You know why the church or the leaders, the intellectual leaders of the time had an issue with him? Because he argued that the only way to get to truth was via empiricism. And the church and other intellectuals at the time said there's other ways to think than pure empiricism. There's reason, there's deduction, there's all kinds of things. But Galileo had the classic modernist approach, right? Let's just redo it over and over again, tweak it, the boom, the thing we like. Instead of thinking about, ought we to have this thing? So you know what happened to Galileo? Oh my gosh, he had to go hang out in his villa for 2 years. Trust me, you and I would kill for a month in the villa where he had to stay. We couldn't even begin to afford the cost of that villa. Inquisition, another one. If we're going to talk about these things, let's talk about the totality of them. A number of his points are well made. Men make mistakes. Women make mistakes. Cultures make mistakes. Civilizations make mistakes. But I argue, if you give Christianity generally, and the notion of the spirituality of man generally, an honest review, and you got to do that without an overbearing prejudice of materialism, I think you might find something there that would shock you. I came out of the 70s with precisely these points of view. And I kept beating away at them because they never satisfied me. They never hung. They were too inconsistent, too simplistic, too overarchingly sweepingly material. And when it was all said and done, I looked out about my life and I said, my gosh, there's a whole lot of things here beyond the material. I've got to check them out.
Gaston said a lot of things that I think I don't have time to address all of. His definition of religion was broader than I would have expected, so it seems like, it sounded like he said religion is the pursuit of happiness. So, over the winter break, I went to Disney World, and I had a great time there. So that was a religious action, because I was trying to be happy. Well, okay, I'm not going to be the semantic police, so I don't care what you call religion. When I say that religion is harmful, I'm talking about like major organized religions. Let me see. So I didn't think that things like utilitarianism or capitalism or empiricism count as religions, but I'm not really going to spend time arguing about that. So there was an argument in his initial speech. I think there was something like this argument that if you have one of these materialistic worldviews, then there's going to be more human conflict because people are going to fight over material goods. And I think this is just not true. So people do sometimes fight over material goods, but I think if you're just going on based on self-interest, eventually people are going to realize that actually you can all be better off if you don't fight and trade peacefully. So countries that trade peacefully with each other are going to be much better off than the countries that fight over things. And if that's all that you care about, then actually there's a pretty good argument for peace. There's not so much of an argument for peace if you're religious, because there's not so much of an argument that you need to tolerate the people with different religions. And frequently, like there's the view that if somebody has the wrong religion, they're actually going to be condemned to eternal torture. And if that's true, you should do anything to stop that. Right? You should impose any cost on anyone in this life if doing so would actually prevent eternal torture. Some of the things that Professor Gaston said I didn't think were relevant to the question that we were supposed to be debating. So he talked about why the United States was a great society, and I agree that it's great. I like the Declaration of Independence. I thought that was a great quotation. But I didn't see that really bore on the benefits of religion per se. Why did I just pick on Judeo-Christian religions? Well, I also picked on Islam. Why did I pick on them? Basically, I was more familiar with them. But I do not believe that other religions are good either. I would not give a pass to Eastern religions or primitive religions. I'm just not as familiar with them, but I suspect that all religions are harmful, actually. Or maybe not all of them, but I suspect that the great majority of religions are harmful. I take the point that I could have spent more time talking about other religions that have other bad problems. There is a point that, I had suggested that people might be drawn away from studying nature into studying religion because, they're interested in God. And if there is a God, that's way more important, right? And I thought that Professor Gaston might say, as he sort of suggested in talking about Newton, that there's another factor, which is you might actually be drawn into studying nature because of religion. Because you think something like, this is going to help you understand God's plan, or something like this, because God created nature. I think that is a possibility, and I think that could be true for some thinkers. But you also have to consider, the other side, which is somebody might be drawn away from studying nature because God is more important than nature. If you're really interested in God, what should you do? Does it make sense to study the stuff that He created, or does it make sense to just study theology? So, true, maybe you can get some insight into God by studying the physical world, but wouldn't you get more insight into God by studying theology directly? Now, I suspect that Newton spoke falsely and perhaps was self-deceived in saying that he was only interested in science because of religion. The degree of concentration that he had, the degree of energy that he put into it, you just have to love it in order to do that. I don't think that somebody could do that just purely instrumentally to understand some other thing if they weren't really intrinsically interested in that. Now that's just my speculation, but I'm just not going to spend these hours and hours, doing this really complicated abstract work unless I'm really fascinated with the subject itself. Other points. there have been, so, it might sound like, oh, I was unfair to Christianity by citing a lot of bad things about Christianity, and there are lots of other things that are bad. I kind of suspected that this point may come up, but it's not really to the point. That's not really on the issue that we're debating. So I agree that there are many other things that are horrible. So there are many other religions that are horrible, and there are also non-religious things that are horrible. So communism came up. Yeah, communism is horrible. Oh my God. They might have killed 100 million people. The estimates are 85 to 100 million or something. That's horrible. In fact, I think Marxism is worse than Christianity. However, that doesn't mean that religion isn't harmful, right? There can be many things that are harmful. Basically, I think dogmatic belief systems, many of the irrational belief systems are very harmful. By the way, it also seemed to me that given Professor Gaston's broad conception of religion, actually these other things would count as religion. So actually I think communism would count as a religion on his view. In which case it's just further evidence that religion is harmful. I wouldn't say that though, I don't think that it counts as a religion. More things about the nature of progress. I guess I have an old-fashioned view or something about scientific progress. But I didn't say that the scientific progress was, simplistic and linear. And I don't say that scientists are always rational. And I agree with the point that scientists have made more mistakes than they've made correct statements. The vast majority of beliefs that scientists have had throughout history have been false. That's totally true. The vast majority of theories that have ever been accepted were wrong. That's true. But none of that really damages my point, right? There's still scientific progress. It's not simple, it's not linear, it's not a completely rational process, but it is a real phenomenon. We know a lot more now than we did 500 years ago. Now there's this question, what really is progress? And Professor Gaston asked something like, do we measure progress in terms of the number of material goods you have? This is a big philosophical question. You might think that because I'm the philosopher, I would answer that. I'm not going to answer that. I'm not going to say in general what constitutes progress, but I'll just say, I think having more material goods is part of it. I don't think that's all of it. But I think that if you just take measures of progress, if you take any sort of straightforward measure of progress, we've had a vast amount of progress, and a lot of it is dependent upon intellectual progress. So we have more material goods, we have fewer diseases, we have longer lives, we have happier people, we have fewer executions, we have fewer murders, and you could just take almost anything that people would generally agree to be bad, and there's less of it today than there was in the past. A lot of it has to do with scientific progress because we now just know how to do things that we didn't know how to do before. So there are fewer people dying of diseases because we made progress in medicine. What about if you have more spiritual concerns? So what if you're more concerned about morality or you're more concerned about art? Well, there's artistic progress in this sense. Today, a lot more people have access to great art. Today, you could buy a CD with a very wonderful performance of great works of classical music, and just an ordinary person could do that. And in the past, vast majority of people had no chance because you'd have to go to a concert hall and they couldn't afford it, right? So if you care about art, there's been enormous progress in that, and it's because of technological and economic progress. What about if you care about morality? Well, it's really hard to measure that, but here's one possible measure: crime. There's a lot less crime today than there was 500 years ago. And so, I might be accused of being a Pollyanna or something, I just think everything's great, but no, just look at the facts. Everything is getting better. And, scientific progress is awesome, and our general progress of our society is awesome, and, just continue. Okay, that's all.
To begin the question and answer session, We're going to begin with Professor James Gaston, who's going to offer a question to Professor Michael Huemer, and there's going to be a three-minute response, and then we will then we'll reverse that.
Yes, so I didn't understand the point of talking about other things that are bad, like how communism was bad, or like, can you say more about
Because because communism, as I think we well know, is predominantly a materialistic vision of reality, and materialistic philosophies and visions of reality likewise produce negative social outcomes. That's the point. Yeah.
Okay.
It's not just one-sided.
But I mean, like why shouldn't I just say, yeah, it's true, other things are bad in addition to religion, right?
Okay, I'm connected now.
Yeah.
What did you say? I'm sorry.
So why shouldn't I respond by just saying, okay, so other things are bad in addition to religion, but that doesn't mean religion isn't bad.
Because you were arguing, as I understood your argument, in a number of ways, you were making the argument that religion, in a number of ways, stymies scientific, empirical advance, if you will, and that's a sign of progress and something that's good. And my point was that such a materialist scientific approach to reality is revealed in other such materialistic ideologies and philosophies, likewise have negative impacts too. So I'm just saying that the key point I'm trying to make here is these are all religions. I really didn't come in here tonight to make a judgment about a particular or group of religions. What I came in tonight to do is to simply say to us, suggest for your thinking, for your consideration, that religion is a generic term for the search for happiness. And if you buy into that argument, I would think you would want the freedom and liberty and the protection to go about doing it. And my argument is, from what I can see, if this is somewhat of a spiritual utilitarian argument, kind of what I'm saying to you is, when I look across the globe and I look at all the religions in the history of the world, for all of its flaws, Christianity, Roman Catholicism in particular, has extended the most civil rights, the most freedom, the most structured juridical and otherwise structure, which allows, for example, the American founding, to quote it, that allows all of us to go about having precisely these debates. See, in the Soviet Union in the 40s and the 50s, this type of debate would never happen. And if it did and you got caught, well, we wouldn't see you probably. All right? So I love this. I came out, I'm a child of the 70s. We went at this stuff tooth and nail, and it's great. This is what a university is supposed to be about. Not blaming people, not finding fault, but trying to find complementarity in our views of things. Trying to figure out how we can be better thinkers and come closer to discerning what really is happiness and how we can all work together to get there. It's simple as that.
Thank you, professors. We'd like to open it up now to our questions from...
So, I think of it, I thought the question was something like, does social cooperation require people to have common beliefs or common values? And my claim is no, because, we just have an interest in cooperating with each other. And if we stop cooperating, we're all going to be worse off. And that's true, even though we don't agree on, maybe we don't have philosophical agreement, we don't have moral agreement, but...
Can I jump in? Would that be all right? I think that... Can you hear me? No. I think, again, that's my argument. If we leave such cooperation solely to a material level of trade, for example, there's not a common unity and a common social activity leading to happiness. It's not that we're all coming together in a social contract theory, a la Hobbes or Locke or Rousseau, if you've read those people. As if we're all just kind of agreeing that, okay, I agree, I'm going to put up with you so I can get on with what it is I got to get done. All right, fine. Right? That's a very limited understanding of society. Society is really a cooperative effort whereby we take patient time with one another and frankly love one another as we attempt to figure out what's important in life, talk about it, discuss it, and try to better our lives according to such things. And you're going to have a greater chance of having those deep conversations By being in a society that's simply meeting at the edge of the river and trading stones for other types of baubles. That's a joke. Thank you.
It's kind of like, think about what common beliefs we might have in actual fact and reality. And if you name anything, I can pretty much guarantee you that somebody is going to disagree with it. And yet, we still have a society. It's still working out.
Dr. Huemer.
Dr. Huemer?
You criticized Newton for allowing his theological interests to distract him from science. Would you be so kind as to comment on how your philosophical studies have improved my standards of living?
I doubt that they have. I want me to comment on how my philosophical work has improved his standard of living. It's really unlikely that it has. It's possible that you read my books and you got some enjoyment out of it. Now, if I were studying science, I might be doing something that's more economically valuable, might be more valuable to society. It would be less valuable to me. And I've never claimed that I'm maximizing benefit to society. I'm definitely not. I am definitely serving myself in large part. I'm not harming society, though.
Yes, Professor Gaston. I'd like to respond to the following sort of argument. Christianity is only good for society if Christianity is fundamentally true. And you probably think Christianity is fundamentally true because you said that an honest review of spirituality and Christianity would come up looking good, okay? Let me give you two reasons for thinking that's not the case. First, there's the existence of God. Now, I would argue there's a version of the problem of evil, the argument of evil. It's a sound argument. I can't say that out here. Let me just cite the following fact. Among philosophers in a recent survey, it turned out about 72% either are atheist or inclined to atheism, and only about 14 to 15% are either theist or inclined to theism. Now, given that the job of philosophy is to look at arguments, and philosophy of religion is a central discipline, right? It seems to me that that statistic provides one of the reasons for thinking there may very well not be any good reason for believing in the existence of God. The other thing applies to Roman Catholicism. Roman Catholicism is created the idea that you and I have immaterial mortal souls, right? But if we wander into psychology departments outside of Catholic universities, right, we'll look long and hard for a professor of psychology, right, who believes that we have immaterial souls. What they believe is that human psychological capacities for consciousness, self-consciousness, cognition, and so on, all depend upon complex variables.
Don't go any further, I'm going to lose you. That's a long statement of the question. I would answer the second question. Well, I would answer the second question by responding, I happen to like Newton and read a lot about Newton. It's interesting, I'd answer the second question first by suggesting there's this great passage of letters between Newton and the great French mathematician Fenelon. And Fenelon writes to Newton, says, Monsieur Newton, I'm so impressed by the theory of gravity and the mathematics and that all that goes with it. And Newton says, writes back to Fenelon, oh, thank you. And Fenelon writes back and says, but I have one question for you, Mr. Newton. And he said, what's that? He said, what is gravity? And Newton writes back to Fenelon literally the following quote. He writes back, Monsieur Fenelon, thank you for your fan letter, so to speak. He says, but the truth of the matter is, I don't have a clue what gravity is. And he said, and secondly, he says to Fenelon, frankly, it's not my job to discern it because it's not observable. But thirdly, he says, however, nonetheless, I see its effects. That's my answer to your first one. Even though we can get in arguments about the percentages of people who are atheists or theists or studying this or studying that, the fact of the matter is, I'm a pretty simple-minded guy. I look out and I see billions of people believing in spirituality. Now, I would say, regardless of the 15% of theists in philosophical circles, I would say, let's have the philosophers or atheists explain to us the mass psychosis of 5,000 years and how many billions of people. Now, How do you explain it? I guess the only rational people are the people in the psychology department. So I look beyond these things, and one of the reasons I've spent my life studying culture is precisely for this reason. That I don't want to get overly caught up in theory. It has its place, but it ought to be limited. I like to look and see what people actually do, and then reason back possibly to their cause, their view. And that view, that cause for why people live the way they do, is their religion.
So my comment is, when average people disagree with the experts are usually right. It's because, well, they're usually smarter, more knowledgeable, they spend more time thinking about it. They're usually the ones who are right.
I'm going to address my question primarily to Dr. Huemer, though I surely do not want to defend religion in general or the Catholic Church that wanted to kill Martin Luther because they believed that salvation was by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone. But I do want to defend the Bible. When you mentioned Leviticus 20:13, homosexuals shall surely be put to death. You then said maybe we shouldn't rely on this source. That's present tense. And my question is, are you aware that the New Testament says that Jesus fulfilled Moses' law? So no, we wouldn't rely on that source, present tense, but we as Christians don't kill homosexuals. However, homosexuality is still a sin because the New Testament says so, and the New Testament hasn't been fulfilled. At least that's the logic that we would use to defend scriptures for today,
Okay.
but not Leviticus.
So what do you mean by fulfilled?
Jesus fulfilled and completed it. In other words, we don't kill lambs today because Jesus is the antitype, the fulfillment, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. So we don't kill lambs. We don't kill homosexuals.
If we're supposed to think that the Old Testament is not true, so then you're fine. But no, I mean, the Old Testament supposedly was written by God.
Right.
So the question is that plausible? And then there's some things that are in it that it just seems to be extremely improbable that God would have ever said that. I mean, it was a long time ago, but even a long time ago, I don't think that those things were correct.
My question is primarily for Dr. Huemer. I just actually would like some clarification on some of your points. First of all, you talked about how religion caused a lot of anarchy, essentially. You mentioned 5 cases where it's led to war. The Crusades, etc. Yeah. But anyways, you stressed the importance of scientific progress. That was your main argument.
Right.
And you say that it's led to essentially less death. And we just came out of the most violent century in the history of the world due to scientific progress. We're talking chemical warfare, the nuclear bomb, IEDs. People die every day through scientific progress. And I just would like clarification how you would say that it has led to less death when I, for all intents and purposes, and just seeing everyday news, see arguments to that.
Yeah, so I've heard people say things like the 20th century was the most violent century in history, but that's just totally not true. It might have a higher absolute number of deaths. I don't even know if that's true, but it has a lower rate of killing. That is, if you divide the number of people who were killed by other people by the total population, in the 20th century was the most peaceful century ever. 21st century is going to be more peaceful. This is documented in Steven Pinker's very long book, The Better Angels of Our Nature. And it's actually by a large margin. So in primitive societies, it's estimated that something like a quarter of the people die at the hands of other people, which is pretty amazing. Now, a fair point is we don't know what will happen in the future. We do now have technology that would be capable of wiping out the species. If there had been a Third World War, there's a fair chance that there wouldn't be any human beings alive now. So there is a serious risk. However, if we look at just what actually happened, here's the best way of overall summing it up. Look at life expectancy. Right? So did the progress cause more deaths or prevent more deaths? That would be reflected in the overall life expectancy statistics. Life expectancy is way up, like highest it's ever been. It's like 77 or 78 or something like that.
This is for Professor Gaston. Do you think that the modern belief of the supreme being, the creator, stems from the innate human necessity to explain the unknown?
Absolutely.
Also, do you think that the notion of religion requires a belief in a supreme being?
Yes. I'm trying to be empirically efficient.
Great, professors. Thanks again, both of you. Well, Dr. Huemer, we're picking on too much here. I'm sorry. I'm going to ask
I am going to direct the question to you, but I would like to hear Professor Gaston's response as well, if possible. It goes back to the question of authority. Your third point, necessity for progress is that we question authority. I wholeheartedly agree that we need to question authority, especially in my search for happiness. But what role does that have? I heard earlier in one of your comments that you said the experts are usually right. So what authority do they have? Obviously, we have to depend on the patrimony of philosophers who have gone before us, trusted family members who have passed on their knowledge and experience to us. Even professors have that authority as well. So what is really that role of authority in society?
Yeah, good question. So, well, it's a little complex. So, the experts are usually right. However, the thing is, like, the expert has to have reasons for their view beyond just, I'm the big person. So, I mean, what I see as the difference between the authority of scientists and religious authorities is the scientist claims that his belief is based upon something that is in principle accessible to other people. So, the scientist says, I did these observations, I did these experiments. If somebody else does them, they're going to get the same result. The religious authorities, so the prophets, claim that they have a special access to the truth that nobody else has. So you can't replicate it. Somebody else tries to talk to God, they won't necessarily get any message. And if they don't get any message, that doesn't refute what the prophet is saying, so you just have to trust in them. So I think that's the important difference.
That was a long question, I kind of forgot. but I have to take issue with Dr. Huemer on the issue that experts are always right. First of all, I don't think there's a person in the room who believes that. And if you do, well, I'm part of a bridge in New York to tell you. Did we get that, Joe? Brooklyn Bridge? Okay, just wondering. But he's also limiting that affirmation of expertise to observability. This is the classic empirical hypothetical hypothesis, modern scientific methodology, right? Experimental science. But if it's accessible to everybody, then why do we need experts? Then what constitutes expertise? I'm generally kind of leery of experts, including myself. Try not to take myself too seriously. But I think what we need to do is keep an eye on what constitutes the average way that human beings live. They'll reveal to us what their nature is if we just watch. But if we only look at certain aspects of them, because we have a priori approach, then we'll reaffirm what we're looking for, because we won't take into account the other things. The other part of your question was just broadly the nature of authority.
Yeah, what is the nature and what is the role of authority? Can we trust authority?
This is a great conversation, and I mean, these are deep subjects that and we could have a series of lectures on these and discussions, right? But authority really only is valid if a person is promulgating the truth. Authority is not power, it's not a force. It's a relationship. Somebody has authority when they have and can convey convincingly a relationship with the truth. But that authority doesn't derive from the person per se. It derives from the fact of their relationship with the truth. So somebody can speak with authority when indeed they are conveying the truthfulness of something, but it's not them per se. It's that they're acting in a sense as a conduit. When we take that point of view, then we can look at political theory and politics and be very, very eye-opened, because government, it's the same matter. Government can only govern authoritatively if it governs rightly. If it doesn't govern rightly, it has no authority. So authority is a question of a relationship with the truth. But to get into that more deeply is a whole philosophical.
You were right that nobody in the room thinks that, or somebody else thinks. But I think that experts are more likely to be right than non-experts. Why? Because, they studied it. Like, what's the point of studying something if that doesn't cause you to learn more? And, on what possible view do you have where studying a subject for a long time, being really smart, knowledgeable, and intelligent, that doesn't make you more likely to have right beliefs? Then there would be no point. That's the question. If anybody can get the same results, why do we need the expert? The answer is that the world is really complicated, and it would take a long time for you to learn this stuff in every field. It takes a long time to learn just one field, and so people have to specialize.
May I give one more shot at that? Great points. I thought you said that all experts are right. But the point I'm trying to convey when we're looking at society is that the society is being shaped by experts, and experts have special knowledge which requires a tremendous amount of training. Perhaps years and years of special training, graduate work, postdocs, et cetera, et cetera. That's not what we constitute as a society. A society is average, everyday people working together, trying to figure out the meaning of it all. So when we come at society from the point of view of an expert, so to speak, I think we want to be careful, and they ought to be careful, and I ought to be careful. How it is we pick and choose which aspects of that subject, that society, we look at because of our scientific specialty. What I haven't conveyed here in this conversation tonight, because it hasn't been overly appropriate, is I spend most of my life studying the totality, the internal structure of societies themselves. I've studied anthropology, sociology. I don't just look at religion and just look at society, some vagary. No, I look at it from all points of view of the unity, of the integrity of cultures. So I'm trying to conform myself to the reality of the human person. Is what I'm trying to do. But sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't.
So you expressed the idea that we are happier today from the Middle Ages through an immersion and kind of an increase in our material goods. So my question for you is, do you believe that there is any immaterial part of man? And it follows that if there is any immaterial part of man, then can that immaterial part only reach happiness through some immaterial fulfillment, or as Professor Gaston alluded to, the origin or God?
The first question is yes, and the answer to the second one is no. People are conscious. I don't think consciousness is a material thing. So there's a non-material part or aspect. However, I don't think that thing can be separated from the body. I made that comment about believing that there could be consciousness separated from the body. I don't think that it is itself a physical thing, but if you destroy the body, you're not going to have any consciousness anymore. Okay, be that as it may, do you have to achieve happiness through some non-material source? I don't see how. So I don't think that that's at all connected with the previous question. So my consciousness is a non-material thing. It doesn't follow that now I have to find some other non-material things to make me happy, right? No, maybe the material thing to make me happy. But by the way, I'm not promoting a simplistic view of what makes people happy. I think if you take any measure of happiness, it doesn't have to be how much stuff you have. If you take any measure you could actually measure, it's probably going to turn out that we're better off today than we were in the past.
Just add to the mix of the conversation, it's intriguing. Look at the problem in which we boxed ourselves, in a sense. If we take an overly empirical, material approach to reality, we grant the reality of consciousness, but we do so without empiricism. What's that tell us? There's other ways to live life than just simply empiricism. And that consciousness exists because we all share in it. We all talk about it. Come on, right? But we can't get at it empirically. But what we can do is observe its effects. And the observing of the effects of consciousness or conscience or our search for truth is revealed in culture. And hence the reason why you want to live in a culture that grants you the most freedom so that you can see the ramifications of your effects and learn. Hence I come back to my argument. Religion is not just good for society, it's essential.
You say that religion is a pursuit of happiness. My question is is there more to that? My argument would be Mother Teresa, one of the church's going to be newest saints, dealt 50 years of her life in complete darkness, and you could say that there's joy in those moments, but I would say joy is different than happiness. Can you go into further detail of what happiness is?
Very, very simple. I was trying to find a generic term to cover everybody's thought as to what they regarded as their end and their great desire. We use various terms, excellence, virtue. But every culture has its concepts of its end. The most generic word we use is happiness. And that's all I meant by that. But I wanted to leave it open so each one of us could ponder in our own lives as we do. And maybe when you're done, I hope it's the case. I want to probably thank University of Boulder and Father for inviting me here. These are just great opportunities for conversation on such matters. And I hope that when it's all said and done, you go home tonight and you have some conversations and tear me apart, tear Huemer apart, whatever it is you're going to do. But think more about your end and happiness and how we work with other people, what kind of society we want to help everyone good stab at finding their own happiness. Hopefully it's a good ultimate happiness. But anyway, it's just a generic term wherever you went. And I was just going to leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you all for such thoughtful and wonderful questions. This is a moment now to where we can have a couple of closing statements from each of our presenters this evening, beginning with Gaston.
I'll just repeat it one more time. It's a pleasure to be here. This is exactly what a university is supposed to be doing, it's supposed to be about. So life is about. We should just be patient, loving with each other, try to understand each other, have dialogue about things, try and find the truth of things, be patient, and enjoy life. But I'd also leave you with a thought, likewise, that I think there's more to life than just material aggrandizement. I don't mind a little material aggrandizement myself, but it's not. I don't think it's our ultimate end. And when we all do focus on such material aggrandizement, the very fact that we choose a particular material thing, or a class of material things, or a perspective of quantity, as in physical mathematics, we automatically pull it out of the reality, the totality of it. And there's only so many of us are going to be interested in these types of things here, or these types of things here. And then we end up building cultures. And they compete over the values of their things. And I'm looking for societies too. I want to leave you with one last thought. I have one more minute here. One part of my presentation I cut out so I don't have time to get into it. And I'll just throw it out there very, very quickly for you to think about. This issue of society and cultures and smaller groups thinking about things, so to speak, was all pondered by the founders of our country. If you haven't read the founding documents of the United States, if you really haven't looked at that period, geez, you ought to. It's a tremendous subject. And what they decided they would do, consciously, is form an overarching society in the federal government, an overarching smaller subsidiary society in the states, but then leave in the local cultures the real ways of life. And if you look at the 10th Amendment again, and you look at the document again, you'll find that they were aware that we need society, but that doesn't mean we destroy cultures. But society unites and culture generally limits. And they try to find a balance between the federal government and the state governments and the counties and the cities and the land. America's an amazing country. I do hope in the founding you take a look at it. And again, thanks for having me here tonight.
So I agree with most of that closing statement. I guess that might seem surprising, but since we're supposed to be on the opposite side, but no, I thought this was an awesome discussion. And also, I agree that the founding period of America is awesome. I don't think you would put it that way. The Declaration of Independence is great. Okay, I'm going to make some other just side comments that I guess I forgot to say. I think there's sort of a tendency to kind of stereotype. Like when you're having these debates, there's the religious person and then the anti-religious person. There's sort of like a stereotype of what these people's views are. I'm not a materialist. I'm not an empiricist. So I don't think that observation is the only source of knowledge. I don't think that everything is physical. But I wasn't asked to talk about those questions. Also, I don't think that there are no benefits to religion. There are benefits to religion. I think there are substantial ones. I think that it might make some people happier. It might increase the happiness of religious people. It might increase their lifespan. I think there have been studies on this, but I don't know the data. But at the same time, there are just costs, and I think it's just plausible that if you were to weigh the costs against the benefits, it's a really complicated thing, but it's plausible that the cost will wind up being higher. And mostly because if it really does slow intellectual progress, that's just huge. That is going to be a huge effect. So if it slowed intellectual progress by 100 years over the course of the past couple of millennia, that's like millions of lives, right? Many millions. What else? Yeah. And the question wasn't really, is religion good for you personally? It was, is it good for society? And so it's plausible that overall it's not, even if it is good for you personally. Okay, that's all.
Thank you both so much. This really has been a wonderful evening. Great and tremendous discourse. Thank you all so much for coming out. We're going to have a reception at 1520 Euclid. You see the map behind me. If you know where Chi Omega is, the underpass that goes under Broadway from the UMC, we're just right up that way. So there's very limited parking there, as you know if any of you are commuters. But please join us for that reception. We have wine and wonderful discourse. Tonight, if you're interested in more of what we are doing here at the Aquinas Institute of Catholic Thought, you can sign up for more information of our lectures. Our next lecture is going to be on April 6th, and it's going to be Mr. Andrew Dorn, who's going to be speaking on Christians in the Middle East, surviving ISIS and global indifference. Again, on behalf of St. Thomas Aquinas and all of us here at the Catholic Center, thank you for coming tonight, and we look forward to seeing you again in our future.